I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 8 English lesson on simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences. And before we start with our lesson, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 8. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences. Right, so that is going to be our chapter for today, and then we're going to do a few lessons under that. So our chapter is simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences. Our subject is English, which is language arts, grade 8. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on is a sentence simple, compound, complex, or compound complex? And we're going to identify dependent and independent clauses. All right. So when it comes to clauses, right? So when it comes to clauses, a clause is a group of words that contains both a subject as well as a predicate. So a clause is a group of words that contains both a subject as well as a predicate. And an independent clause, right, is a complete thought that can basically stand on its own or stand alone as a sentence. So a clause is a group of words that contains both subject as well as a predicate. And an independent clause is a complete thought that can stand alone as a sentence. A dependent clause, on the other hand, a dependent clause is not a complete thought, and a dependent clause, it cannot stand alone as a sentence. That is now a dependent clause, whereas an independent clause is a complete thought and that can stand alone as a sentence. For example, the oranges on the tree are ripe. So the oranges on the tree are ripe. So if we look at that specific sentence, right, that is a sentence that can stand on its own, which means that that is an independent clause because it can stand on its own, right? And then if we look at the next sentence, it says, after we pick up Kevin from work. So now you're asking yourself, after we pick up Kevin from work, and then it's almost like that sentence is not complete, and you can even hear, right, that sentence is not complete, which means that this clause cannot stand alone So it is a dependent clause. And usually a dependent clause, it needs an independent clause. So a simple sentence, it is made up of a single independent clause. And we said, of course, an independent clause has both a subject as well as a predicate. For example, Ben and I spent all day relaxing by the pool. So Ben and I spent all day relaxing by the pool. So that is a simple sentence that is made up of a single independent clause that can stand on its own. All right, and then we have some simple sentences, right? And some simple sentences have introductory phrases, but the introductory phrase is part of the predicate. For example, in the winter, Ben usually wears his heavy coat. Or we can say, Ben usually wears his heavy coat in the winter. So we can either say, in the winter, Ben usually wears his heavy coat, or we can kind of like turn it around and say, Ben usually wears his heavy coat in the winter. So when it comes to a compound sentence, on the other hand, a compound sentence is made up of two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction such as, but, or so. Right? So firstly, a simple sentence have some simple sentences have introductory phrases, right? But it is part of the predicate. And then a compound sentence, it is made up of two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction, which is and, but, or so. For example, we saw the flash of lightning, and seconds later we heard a rumble of thunder. So we said a compound sentence, it's made up of two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction such as and, but, or so. And when it also comes to coordinate compound sentences, remember that it is basically joining the two sentences, right? So it's two independent clauses that can basically stand on its own. And if you join that two words with a coordinating conjunction, then it basically becomes one sentence. And then we have a complex sentence, right? And a complex sentence, it is made up of an independent clause and it is made up of a dependent clause. So compound sentence, it's made up of an independent clause and it is made up of a dependent clause. So we say the compound sentence, complex sentence, it is made up of an independent clause. Remember, independent clause can stand on its own, and a dependent clause which cannot stand on its own, which means that it's mainly the dependent clause that needs that independent clause, right, within a sentence. And we call this a complex sentence. So the dependent clause in a complex sentence usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. So remember, there's a difference between subordinating conjunction and a coordinating conjunction. So subordinating conjunctions, right, include words like after, so after, although, as, because, before, if, since, unless, until, when, and while. So those are subordinating conjunctions. And then we have relative pronouns, which includes words like which, who, whom, or whose. All right. So we remember we said a subordinating conjunction. Um, it's what we write when we are writing a dependent clause within a complex sentence, right? And then we have a coordinating conjunction. It's when we use a coordinating conjunction to join two independent clauses, and a coordinating conjunction is words like and, but, or so. So if she ever gets a chance, Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. This is now the a question, right, or an example question based on a complex sentence, right? And we said a complex sentence, it's made up of an independent clause as well as a dependent clause. And the dependent clause within a complex sentence, it usually begins with a subordinating conjunction or relative pronoun, which I've underlined. So if she gets the chance, Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. And during his trip to Italy, Tony visited Trevi Fountain, which is in Rome. So once again, a complex sentence is made up of an independent clause and it is made up of a dependent clause, right? And then we have a compound complex sentence. And a compound complex sentence, it's made up of two or more independent clauses. So a compound complex sentence is made up of two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. So we say that a compound complex sentence, right? It is once again made up of two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses, right? And we make an example when we say, after Samantha left work, she stopped at the bank and then she went to the gym. So after Samantha left work, she stopped at the bank and then she went to the gym. And when we look at that sentence, right, sometimes a dependent clause within a complex or compound complex sentence can interrupt an independent clause. Oopsie. All right. So this is basically our different types of, let's say it's supposed to be different types of sentences, but it is basically just a simple compound complex as well as compound complex sentences, right? And we are doing a tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So far, we've identified what a simple sentence is, and a simple sentence is made up of an independent clause, a single independent clause that can basically stand on its own. And then we have a compound sentence, right, which is made up of two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction, such as and, but, or, so. And then we have a compound complex sentence. All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca. And we're going into the first lesson where it says, is there a simple, compound, complex, or compound complex sentence? So which type of sentence is this? Russia has a variety of natural resources, including oil, natural gas, timber, iron ore, copper, and lead. So if we look at the sentence, it says Russia has a variety of natural resources, including oil, natural gas, timber, iron ore, copper, and lead, right? So now we need to say what type of sentence is this? Is it a simple, compound, complex sentence, right? And if we look at the sentence, then it just seems like it is a simple sentence, simple and straight to the point. All right. Oops. So Lorraine, we need to say which type of sentence is this. Lorraine Hansberry wrote the widely acclaimed 1959 Broadway play A Raisin in the Sun, and her accomplishment opened the door for other African American playwrights. And if we basically look at our two sentences, right? And I specifically say two because over here it is joined by a conjunction, which is and, which means that this specific sentence is a compound sentence. All right, so we say Lorraine Hansberry wrote the wildly acclaimed 1959 Broadway play A Raisin in the Sun, and her accomplishment opened the door for other African American playwrights. So I feel that's a compound sentence, especially since it's joined by a coordinating conjunction, which is and. All right. Ooh. All right, so now let's go to our test. So we need to say like which type of if it's a what type of sentence it is, if it's simple, compound, complex, or compound complex, right? So if we can't find an expensive hotel for the 4th of July, we can always stay with the parents. So if we cannot find an inexpensive hotel for the 4th of July, so we need to say if this is a simple sentence, compound sentence, it's not a compound sentence, complex sentence, or compound complex sentence. All right, let's say it is, oh, so it's a complex sentence, sorry. And there we have the subordinating conjunction also. So annual plants survive only one season and must be replaced each year. But perennials, return each year with new flowers and foliage. So annual plants survive only one season and must be replaced each year, but perennials return each year with new flowers and foliage. So we need to say what type of sentence this is. Is it a simple sentence? Is this a compound sentence? Is this a complex sentence or compound complex sentence? So annual plants, they survive only one season and must be replaced each year. But perennials return each year with new foliage and flowers. Right? So we need to say which type of sentence is this. And if we even look at the sentence, right, then we can say, look at our word but that is joining these two independent clauses. So we can maybe say it is a compound sentence, right? Because we are joined by two independent clauses, right? And we are joined by a coordinating conjunction, which is but. No, I'm not Mrs. McAtory. All right, so now we need to say which sentence is the next one. It says the right hemisphere of the human brain typically controls muscle movement on the left side of the body. So the right hemisphere of the human brain typically controls muscle movement on the left side of the body. So we need to say, is that a simple sentence, a compound sentence, complex sentence, or compound complex sentence? So the right hemisphere of the human brain typically controls muscle movement on the left side of the body. So we now need to say which type of sentence it is. Simple, straight to the point, compound, complex, or compound complex. All right, so if we're going to choose what type of sentence it is, right, then we can say it's a simple sentence, right? So yes, so well done. It is a simple sentence. So since 1923, the United States Flag Code has provided advisory rules for displaying and handling the US flag. So simple sentence it is. So well done. But now let's go to the next one. It says simple since 1923, the United States Flag Code has provided advisory rules for displaying and also handling the US flag. So now we need to say which type of sentence this is. If it's a simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, or a compound complex sentence. All right. So since 1923, the United States Flag Code has provided advisory rules for displaying and handling the US flag. We need to say if it's a simple sentence, it's definitely not a compound sentence. We need to say if it's a complex sentence or a compound complex sentence. All right, so if we look at our sentence, right? Like we said, it is not a compound sentence because a compound sentence, it basically is two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction, right? So it's either a simple sentence or it is a complex sentence, especially since we start with the word since. Let's try complex. Oh, so it is actually a simple sentence. It's just that it starts with since 1923. So it is a simple sentence. It's just that it starts with 1923. Simple sentence. Complex sentence is when we have a simple sentence that is also joined by a dependent clause. So yeah, and then a dependent clause, it starts with a subordinating conjunction, right? All right, so now we're going to identify dependent as well as independent clauses, right? And we see that a clause is a group of words that contains both subject as well as a predicate, right? So we have dependent clauses as well as independent clauses. And an independent clause is a complete thought. That is an independent clause. That is basically a clause that can stand on its own, right? And it expresses a complete thought. And like we said, it can stand on its own, whereas a dependent clause is not a complete thought and it cannot stand alone as a sentence. For example, if we look at the sentence, let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe. So let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe, right? So if we look at the specific sentence, this is an independent clause because it can basically stand on its own. It has a subject as well as it has a predicate, right? But now, if we look at the next sentence, after Kevin gets off from work, so now you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, and then what happens after Kevin gets off from work, right? So this is a dependent clause because it cannot stand on its own. And that is where a complex sentence also comes in because a complex sentence, it is made up of an independent clause, and a complex sentence, it's made up of a dependent clause. So it's made up of an independent as well as a dependent clause. And the dependent clause within the complex sentence, it usually begins with a subordinating conjunction, which includes after, although, as, because, before, if, since, unless, until, when, and while. So that is subordinating conjunctions, right? So which means that within a complex sentence is made up of an independent clause as well as a dependent clause. And the dependent clause within a complex sentence, it begins with a subordinating conjunction and any of those words which I have just underlined, which are subordinating conjunctions. And then we also have relative pronouns, right? So subordinating conjunction. So a dependent clause can either start with a subordinating conjunction or a relative pronoun. And relative pronouns include words like which, who, whom, or whose. And if we look at an example, right, it says, let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe after Kevin gets off work. So this is now basically putting the two together, right? And there we have the word after, which is our subordinating conjunction. And that is the beginning of a subordinating, at the beginning of a dependent clause. And then also if we look at the next one, which says, during his trip to Italy, Tony visited the Trevi Fountain, which is in Rome, right? Which means that if we look at this word which, that is a relative pronoun. So which means that the dependent clause starts or begins with a relative pronoun, which is which. All right. So before we go to our test, right, it says, since Mr. Durand, we need to select the dependent clause, right? It says, since Mr. Durand had been sick all week and may still have been contagious, he stayed home from his family reunion on Saturday. So we need to select the dependent clause within that sentence. The dependent clause, remember, dependent clause either begins with a relative pronoun or a subordinating conjunction. All right, so if we select the dependent clause within that sentence, right, then we can say the dependent clause starts with since, and it is since Mr. Duran had been sick all week and may still have been contagious. This is a dependent clause, right? And then he stayed home from his family reunion on Saturday is a independent clause. All right, let's go to our test where we are going to identify if it is an independent or a dependent clause. So we're going to have to select the dependent clause, right, within the sentence. It says the center of the Atacama Desert in South America is considered one of the most arid areas in the world because no rain has been recorded there. So we need to now select the dependent clause. So is the dependent clause because no rain has ever been recorded there or the center of Atacama Desert? We need to select the dependent clause. So because no rain has ever been recorded there, or the center of Atacama Desert. We need to select the dependent clause. All right. So if we select the dependent clause, so we're saying it's number one because of the word because, right? The subordinating conjunction. So well done. The first one is correct. Sorry. All right, so now we need to select the dependent clause. It says, since Mr. Durand had been sick all week and may still have been contagious, he stayed from home. He stayed home from his family reunion on Saturday. So we need to select the dependent clause. Is it since Mr. Durand had been sick all week and may still have been contagious, or since Mr. Durand had been sick? Which one is the dependent clause? So is it option one or option two? All right, so if we select the dependent clause, right, we will say it is option one, which is since Mr. Durand had been sick all week and may still have been contagious. So it is the first one, and it even starts with a subordinating conjunction, which is since. So well done. All right, let's do the last one. The last one is to select an independent clause, the independent clause. It says, after a lightning bolt passes through the air, the compression and subsequent rapid expansion of the air molecules produces the booming sound of thunder. So we need to select the independent clause. So is it the compression and subsequent rapid expansion of air molecules produces the booming sound of thunder, or air molecules produces the booming sound of thunder? So we need to choose either option one or option two. So it's either the compression and subsequent rapid expansion of the air molecules produces the booming sound of thunder, or just air molecules produces the booming sound of thunder. All right, so if we select the independent clause, we can say the compression and subsequent rapid expansion, right? So it is option one. So well done. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences, right? So simple sentence is basically made up of a subject as well as a predicate. and it is basically an independent clause that can stand on its own. Then we have a compound sentence, which is in made up of two independent clauses, which is joined by a coordinating conjunction, which is and, but, or so. Then we have a complex sentence, which is made up of both independent clause as well as a dependent clause. And the dependent clause, it starts with a subordinating conjunction, or it starts with a relative pronoun, right? So that is now the end of our lesson. Thank you very much, grade 8s, for joining the class, and you should have a good evening further. Goodbye.